Chapter 67. At the last moment I had angrily cried her name. I thought at first that they had found some fantastic double, but no one could have imitated that walk, the way of standing. I leaped back to the phone and got the night boarder. "That call, can you trace it?" He didn't understand trace. "Do you know where it came from?" No, he didn't know. Had anyone strange been in the hotel lobby during the last hour? Anyone waiting for some time? No, Mr. Ulf, nobody. I turned off the shower, tore back into my clothes, and went out into Constitution Square. I went round all the cafes, peered into all the taxis, went back to Zonar's, to Tom's, to Zapariti's, to all the fashionable places in the area, unable to think, unable to do anything but say her name and crush it savagely between my teeth. Allison, Allison, Allison. I understood how I understood. Once I had accepted, and I had to accept, the first incredible fact that she must have agreed to join them. But how could she? And why? Again and again, why? I went back to the hotel. Conchis would have discovered about the quarrel, perhaps even overheard it. If he used cameras, he could use microphones and tape recorders. Approached her during the night, or early the next morning, those messages in the earth. Hirondelle. The people in the Piraeus Hotel who had watched me try to persuade her to let me back into the room. As soon as I mentioned her name, Conchis must have pricked up his ears. As soon as he knew she was coming to Athens, envisaged new complications in his plans. He would have had us followed from the moment we met, then persuaded her, all his charm, perhaps half deceiving her to begin with. I had a strange moment of non-sexual jealousy, a vision of his telling her the truth. I wish to give this selfish young man of yours a lesson he will never forget. I remembered old spats with Allison over something not entirely unconnected. Various contemporary writers and painters pointing out their faults had always pleased me more than hearing her fall for their virtues. Even there I had used to feel slighted personally, as she had been shrewd enough to tell me, often enough. Or had she always been working for him? Hadn't he almost forced me to meet her by canceling that half-term weekend? Even offered me the village house if I wanted to bring her to the island? But I remembered something June had said on that last night, how they improvised, how the rat was granted parity with the experimenter in constructing the maze. I could believe that. So they must somehow, after her screaming at the Piraeus Hotel, have found a way to buy Allison with their sick logic. Their madness, their lies, their money, perhaps told her the great secret I was not allowed to know, why they had chosen me in the first place. I also remembered all the lies I had told them about Allison over matters on which they must have had full knowledge. I growled out loud at the recall. Then, too, on reflection, it had always been odd how little use had been made of June. There were all her costumes in the earth. A much fuller role must have been planned for her before Allison's unexpected entry. That very first face-to-face, mouth-to-mouth meeting with her, with its implicit sneer at my inconstancy, that repeated nonsense about the three hearts story. They showed how things might have gone. Then the Sunday on the beach, that flaunting of her bare body. Perhaps Conchis had not been sure of Allison so soon after the first approach. Other contingencies had to be allowed for. Then Allison must have been won, and June withdrew from the action. That was also why Lily's character, in part, had changed, and why she had to take on, and so rapidly, the Circe role, the sedan coffin. It had not been empty. They would have wanted her to witness the success of their method. I writhed mentally under the mercilessness of it, the endless exposure, The trial, my preying on young women, she must have also put them up to that. And that suicidal mood she had been in before I left London. All their knowledge of my past. I was mad with anger. I thought of that genuine and atrocious wave of sadness I had felt when the news about Allison came. All the time she would have been in Athens, perhaps in the house in the village, or over at Barani, watching me, even, playing an invisible Maria to Lily's Olivia and my Malvolio. Always these echoes of Shakespearean situations. I walked up and down my room, imagining scenes where I had Allison at my mercy, beating her black and blue, making her weep with remorse. And then again it all went back to Conchis, to the mystery of his power, his ability to mold and wield girls as intelligent as Lily, as independent as Allison. As if he had some secret that he revealed to them that put them under his orders, and once again I was the man in the dark, the excluded, the eternal but. Not a Hamlet mourning Ophelia, but Malvolio. I couldn't sleep, and I felt rather like going down to Elenicon and wringing the neck of the girl at the airline counter. Both the man who had first answered and the girl herself had, I saw now, been a little too anxious to establish who I was. They must have been persuaded, perhaps by Allison herself, to cooperate, but I knew I would get nowhere there. Very probably they would produce the same forged cuttings. Meanwhile, I had to do something. I went down to the hotel foyer and found the night porter. I want a line to London. This number. I wrote it down. A few minutes later, he pointed to a box. I stood listening to the phone burr in my old flat in Russell Square. It went on a long time. At last, it was picked up. "For goodness sake, who's that?" The operator said, "I have a long-distance call for you from Athens." "From where?" I said, "Okay, operator. Hello? Who is that?" She sounded a nice girl, but she was half asleep. Though the call cost me £4, it was worth it. I discovered that Ann Taylor had gone back to Australia, but 6 weeks before, no one had killed herself. The girl on the other end didn't know. But I think she's a friend of Ann's, had taken over the flat. She hadn't seen her for weeks. Yes, she had blonde hair. Actually, she had only seen her twice. Yes, she thought she was Australian. But who on earth? Back in my room, I remembered the flowers in the buttonhole of the coat I had worn that afternoon. It was very wilted, but I took it out and stuck it in a glass of water. I woke up late, having finally slept sounder than I expected. I lay in bed for a while, listening to the street noises down below, thinking about Allison. I tried to recall exactly what her expression had been, whether there was any humor, any sympathy, an indication of anything, good or bad, in her small standing there. I could understand the timing of her resurrection. As soon as I got back to London, I should have found out, so it had to be in Athens. And now I was to hunt for her. I wanted to see her. I knew I wanted to see her desperately, to dig or beat the truth out of her, to let her know how vile her betrayal was, to let her know that even if she crawled around the equator on her knees, I could never forgive her, that I was finished with her, disgusted by her, as disintoxicated of her as I was of Lily. I thought, Christ, if I could only lay my hands on her, but the one thing I would not do was hunt for her. I only had to wait. They would bring her to me now, and this time I would use the cat. I went down to a noon breakfast, and the first thing I discovered was that I did not have to wait, for there was another letter by hand for me. This time it contained just one word, London. I remembered that order in the earth, termination by July, for all except Nucleus. Nucleus. Ashtaroth the unseen was Allison. I went to the travel agency and got a seat on the evening plane, and seeing a map of Italy on the wall, as I stood waiting for the ticket to be made out, I discovered where Subiaco was, and decided to take a gamble. The marionette would make the manipulators of strings wait a day for a change. When I came out, I went into the biggest bookshop in Athens, on the corner of Statiu, and asked for a book on the identification of flowers. My belated attempt at resuscitation had not been successful, and I had had to throw the buttonhole away. The assistant had nothing in English, but there was a good French flora, she said, which gave the names in several languages. I pretended to be impressed by the pictures, then turned to the index to Alyssum, page 69. And there it was, facing page 69. Thin green leaves, small white flowers, Alyson maritime, parfum de miel, from the Greek without, Lissa, madness, called this in Italian, this in German, in English, sweet Allison.